Hello and welcome to my channel if you're new here, and welcome back if you've been here before. In this video I'm going to be showing you 3 meatless Friday meal ideas to make. The first one is sort of a one-pot lazy man's tuna casserole, and basically what you need is a box of pasta. As you can see here, I use the Banza brand. It's garbanzo beans that are turned into a pasta, kind of a twirly pasta that I liked. So this is a gluten-free, can't say that's necessarily keto, but it could be close to keto type of dish. Anyway, once you've got the water boiling, you add the pasta. Once that's soft enough, you drain it. And I usually rinse it if it's, well, pretty much any pasta I rinse. And then I add in slices of American cheese. Now you can use pretty much any cheese you want, but I find it tastes more like a tuna casserole to me using the American cheese. So I usually toss in those slices, and as you can see here, I'm trying to hold the camera with one hand and stir with the other, so it was a little difficult to do. But yeah, mix in the cheese. I usually use probably about 5 or 6 slices of American cheese in this dish. Now once I've got the cheese all incorporated and covering the pasta, that's when I'll add the tuna. You can add whatever tuna you like, but I like to use soy-free tuna, and this one happened to be the Tuna Creations sweet and spicy. So you mix that all up, and then that's pretty much it. You can add peas if you want to, or potato chips on top, whatever you like. But it's basically an easy, convenient one pot of tuna casserole, and you can use gluten-free noodles for it, which makes it even better. Now the next recipe is cabbage steaks, and this is one that I actually got out of my keto cookbook. And the difference between what I'm going to do here and the one in the keto cookbook is, on a non-meatless Friday, you could add bacon bits to the top when you cook it to add a little extra flavor. But basically you're going to take a head of cabbage, take off the outer leaves, clean it, and then you're going to cut it. According to the recipe it says 1-inch slices, but I think it would probably be better with 3/4 of an inch or maybe even a 1/2 inch, because the 1-inch slices just seemed kind of thick and they didn't cook down as much as I would have expected that they would have. But basically you're just cutting slices in the cabbage going from the top down. So if you're looking at cabbage head on, you'd be cutting it horizontally, not vertically. Anyway, so you take those slices of the cabbage, so basically the cabbage steaks, and you lay them in a pan. And what you're going to do is you're going to pour olive oil over them. And I think I was a little bit conservative when I poured the olive oil over these. They probably would have been better if I had put more olive oil on them. So that was sort of a learning lesson for me when I made this, was douse that sucker. Pour olive oil all over the top, add salt and pepper. I think even garlic salt would probably taste really good on this. You're going to have the oven set to 400 degrees. So when you're cooking this, and it's only for 20 minutes that you're cooking this. So when you're cooking this, you're wanting the cabbage to kind of get soft and tender and bring out the natural flavor of the cabbage, which is kind of sweet, but also have the salt and pepper flavor kind of come through. So you see, I had the cabbage baking in the oven. It was for 20 minutes, and then I'm taking it out. And as you can see, the two on the left, because when I actually made these cabbage steaks, it wasn't on a Friday. So I made the two on the left with the bacon bits on the top and the two on the right without, just to see what the flavor difference was in them. But yeah, they actually turned out really nice, and the outer edges crisped up. Now for the pierogies. Pierogies are delicious. They're a labor of love, but they are possible. And until I'd had my first pierogies, I didn't even think about making them. And then I was like, you know, I could totally do this. So I found a recipe on Pinterest that I love. And as you're going to see here, basically it starts out with 2 cups of flour. So I'm going to get the 2 cups of flour here with my favorite little hand measuring cup. And you're going to scoop those 2 cups into the bowl. And that's for the starters. And then after that, you're going to add the salt, which I'll put down in the description, the recipe for the pierogies. But in the meantime, I'll walk you through roughly what I did. So we've got the flour that I'm measuring out here. And then after I do the flour, I'm going to add the salt. And then once you're done with the salt, you're going to beat an egg in a bowl. And you'll incorporate that with the sour cream. And you're basically turning this into the pierogi dough. This first part is just the pierogi dough. And then once I got the dough done, that's when I'll show you how to do the stuffing that goes inside. Now you only need 1 egg for this. We just got some farm fresh eggs from a lady who lives a few miles from us, and I love them because that yolk is a bright orange and not yellow like we've been having to deal with. Her ducks and chickens just started laying a lot of eggs again because the weather's warming up. So you beat the egg, and then you'll incorporate all of the egg into the flour and salt mixture. And then once you've got the egg in there, you'll add the sour cream, and it's a 1/2 cup of sour cream that goes into this. And then you'll add the butter too, which the butter is supposed to be softened already, so that's a 1/4 cup of butter that you put into this. So you have the flour with the salt already mixed into that, and then you add the 1 egg that you've already beaten, and then after that you'll add the sour cream, which is a 1/2 cup, and the butter, which is softened, and that's a 1/4 cup. And you're going to mix this all together until it gets sort of a doughy consistency. You want the stickiness to basically go away, but you don't want to overbeat it. The recipe specifies that if you're using like a stand mixer with the bread attachment, to not over mix it, just mix it enough that's, combined and turned into the dough. I don't have one of those, so I just use a fork and then eventually my hands. I've heard some of the best chefs say that's really the best way to mix stuff anyway, so that's what I have available and that's what I used, and it worked just fine like that. So you're going to want to get everything incorporated, and you don't want it to be sticky anymore. It stuck to my hands a little bit initially, but the more it got incorporated, the less it stuck. And then after that, you're going to put it into the plastic wrap. Now once you get it to the consistency where it's ready for the plastic wrap, you just get the plastic wrap out. I dumped it onto it and then sort of mushed it together and then wrapped the plastic wrap around it and then kind of squish it back together again in the plastic wrap itself. And then you're going to want to refrigerate that from anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to, if possible, you could leave it for a couple days in the refrigerator. Now, while that's chilling in the refrigerator, you can make your potatoes. You can either take actual potatoes, cut them up in cubes, and boil them, which I've done that one before, or you can use instant potatoes, which is what I did this time, and then just shred some cheese. I used a sharp cheddar cheese, like I use in my chili, and I just put that into the pot and stirred that up to incorporate that. And then for the onions, which you see me cutting here, that'll be for the part after you've boiled the pierogies. So I wanted to have the onions ready because I didn't want it to be where I was jumping from making the dough and stuffing the pierogies to having to cut up the onions. So once I got the onions all cut up, I tossed them in the pan that I was going to cook them in, and they could just sort of hang out there while I was doing the rest of the process. And now's the part where things start getting a little bit more intense and things go a bit faster. So as you can see, I pull out my silicone mat here, and I'm going to get the dough out and I'm going to put it onto the mat, and I'm going to get my rolling pin. And basically you start out by getting the dough onto the mat and then rolling it out. So at this point I have the mat out, I've floured it, I've got the dough on it, I've pressed the dough down, and then I'm going to start rolling it with the rolling pin, which you'll see here in just a moment. And basically I'm just sort of getting it flattened out and smoothed out, trying to roll it both vertically and horizontally. You're going to want to roll the crust out until it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. So I mean, you're rolling this pretty thin. Not too thin though, but still pretty thin. Now when you get it all rolled out, it'll be ready to cut, and you could use honestly a glass. I think that's what I did the first time, was I used a small glass and used that as the cutter for this. Now my husband, after I made pierogies the first time, saw a thing on Amazon with a little kit for making pierogies, so he got me the kit. So I not only had the cookie cutter shape, but I also had the little tool, I guess you'd say, to lay the dough in and then to be able to close the pierogies, and it sort of sealed them for me, which the first time I used it I wasn't fantastic at it. This time went a lot better. So as you see here, I'm going to just be rolling out the dough over and over again and then cutting it with the pierogi cutter. I'd say a cookie cutter, but I'm not cutting cookies with it, and I've only ever used this for pierogies. So each time when I run out of space, I'll just re-roll the dough and then cut the dough with the cutter and keep going. I'd actually cut the dough in half, and so I'm only rolling out a half of it pretty much on this sheet. And so you'll see me pulling from the right side where I grab the extra dough and I incorporate that into what's already on the board, roll it out, and keep cutting. And so you can get, from what the recipe says, about 12 to 15 pierogies out of this. I really honestly didn't count, but I know that I had enough that my husband and kids and I were all able to eat lunch, well, a little bit at lunch, and then dinner with this. And you know, there's sides that you can put with it too, so you're not just eating the pierogies, but they were good. Now at this point I'm going to speed this up and cut a little bit out, because I seriously doubt that you want to watch me roll out and cut out all 15 or so pierogies. And now rolling out and cutting the very last of the pierogi. Now you get to see the pierogi maker I was talking about. This is that little piece that basically I put the pierogi on there, put the filling in, and it sort of mashes and closes it for me. And I noticed I usually have to roll out the pierogies, the cutouts, a bit before I put them in it, in order to make sure that they mash and fill it in well enough, because it dips down in the middle and they seem to shrink up after I cut them. So that was the first one I rolled, slightly awkwardly, and then you put in the filling. And according to the recipe, you're supposed to roll the filling into like 1-inch balls, but that's a little too hands-on and gross feeling to me, so I still ended up kind of rolling it into a little bit of a ball, but I mostly used a spoon, got what I thought was about 1 inch worth, and I'm taking the pierogi dough and I'm just sort of rolling it, and then I'm sort of pressing it into the pierogi press and filling in a little bit, because I've had problems with overstuffing these before, so I made sure to get my 1 inch, and you just close it up and the pierogi press literally seals your pierogies for you. I had 1 or 2 that when I opened it up, it didn't seem like they sealed, so I pressed them again. I find it's a little bit better to have extra dough coming out of the edges than not enough, so I will usually roll the dough and then put it into the press it down into the press, so where it dips down, it fills in that spot and isn't just like laying flat across everything. And then I put the filling in, which is the potatoes and cheese, and then I carefully close the press and squeeze it really tight to make sure that it seals, and then carefully take it out. And I typically do about 5 or 6 of these at a time, and then I'll put it into the boiling pot of water, which that'll be the next step. So you here just see me rolling the cutout pierogies, putting them in the press, sticking the filling in, and then closing the press in order to seal the pierogies and laying them aside and waiting for the next one. See that one there? I opened it up and it wasn't quite sealed, so I put it back down in the press and pressed it again, and then that time it was fine. Some of these pierogies came out a little bit more perfectly circular than others, and some of them I kind of messed up the circular shape by rolling them, so I had to remember to look at them and see which direction they needed rolled in first, if they needed rolled in both directions, or to just lightly do it. Now this is how I put it into the boiling water. I took a metal spoon with holes in it and just sort of plopped them into the boiling water, because from past experience I've learned my lesson about having hot stuff, water or oil, splashing back at you when you drop something into boiling water. So I used a spoon, and basically you cook them until they float to the top, and that's how you know that they're done. On a couple of the batches I actually went in with the spoon and sort of flipped them over to make sure that they were thoroughly cooked on both sides, and once they float to the top and you're sure they're cooked, then you'll end up taking them out, and the next step, which you won't see because it was at my sink, and it's a little bit harder sometimes to get the camera over there, especially when I'm working at the counter pressing pierogies, but basically you'll take them out of the pot. I put them into a strainer with another bowl underneath, and you run cold water over them. So you want to rinse the pierogies with cold water and then dry them. So I basically put out plates with paper towels in them and had them dry that way. So this was the first batch of pierogies, and I think I did 3 or 4 different groupings. As you can see, I was sort of knocking them down with the spoon to make sure that they were well cooked on both sides, because doughy pierogies are gross. Now this is one of the plates. Like I said, there were like 3 plates I had stacked with pierogies, and that's the strainer I used with the bowl underneath. So the pierogies would go out of the pot into that strainer. I would rinse the pierogies in the sink with cold water, and I kept dumping whatever water collected in the bowl out because I was holding the strainer with the bowl underneath. That way I could just lay the strainer with the bowl underneath it on the counter and not worry about it dripping on the counter. You want to lay the pierogies on paper towels to dry. Get them thoroughly dry before you put them in this pan with the butter. By thoroughly dry, I mean like you pick them up and they're not slippery and sliding in your hand. You want them pretty much dried off by the paper towel. I actually would put the paper towel underneath, let them dry for a bit, and then change the paper towel if I need to. Once they were dry, you put them in a skillet with onions. You want to have a lot of butter in there too, so you want to cook the onions till they're kind of getting translucent, then put the pierogies in. And I think I did like 3 batches of the pierogies in the pan with the onions, and my husband actually came by, and he's honestly better at this part. He took a whole stick of butter and just dumped it right in the pan and took over the frying of the pierogies, which I appreciated because it gave me a moment to just sort of sit down for a moment. But I at least had gotten the process started. But as you can see here, this was the second batch of pierogies to go into the pan. The first batch was done and I took them out, and so I did the first and second batch, and he did the third and fourth batch. And you basically just cook them until they start getting crispy around the edge. Now, something I think I didn't address before, the filling that goes inside the pierogies, that was mashed potatoes with like 4 to 8 ounces of cheddar cheese that I used, sharp cheddar cheese. So in case you were wondering about that, that was how much cheese you use. But I'll have it down in the description as far as the recipe goes. So you basically just keep cooking them until they get really crisp around the edges. And in general, the dough will taste kind of crisp. And then that's when you pull them out and you plate them. And that's the pierogies. I hope you liked this video. And if you haven't yet, click the subscribe and like button down below. And I will see you in my next video.